embrace the chaos, but not in a loving way. Embrace it, put it in a chokehold, and then make it taste the curb. Make it serve your purposes. We live in a universe in which entropy is always increasing. It is our God-given duty to impose order on the chaos and make gold out of the straw of the chaos. What the heck are you talking about here, Mr. Wargaming? Well, I'm talking about how I learned to stop worrying and embrace the randomness of games like Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I'm an expert in advanced Dungeons & Dragons. This is my preferred game of choice, but whatever game you're dealing with, I think the principles apply just as well. I should say the principles what we're going to be talking about today. What we're talking about today is things like random charts. Let's take a look at one of them here in the Dungeon Master's Guide real quick. We begin with Appendix C, Random Monster Encounters. Whichever version you are playing, I think some of the principles that we'll discuss here are worth thinking about. They're worth discussing. First thing to be aware of is, if you haven't read this section of the DMG in a while, go through, take your time, sit down, a nice brandy, get in a hammock, a little cigar, get comfortable in the easy chair, maybe by a roaring fire. Read this. Think about what Gary is telling you. These are the design notes that he used for the development of what follows, and they are solid advice on how to prepare tables for your campaign. He does mention, hey, look, there's lots of other things coming out. You don't need to use these tables. Understand that these rules are, when we advocate for the rules as written, there are a lot of blank spaces left on the map that Gary has provided for us. There's lots of areas for you to fill in, and these random encounters are one area in which you need to go through and start coloring in the lines for him, at least if you want to personalize your own encounters. Now, one thing to be aware of when we talk about levels, there's three different ways that we refer to levels. There's the level of the character, there's the level of the dungeon that you are on, and then there is the monster level, or the difficulty. To use 3rd edition parlance, that would be the, what do they call it, challenge rating? I think they use that in 5th edition too, but I don't play either of those games. I play the real D&D, so I can't help you. But the general principle in modern Dungeons & Dragons is that a dungeon master should only challenge players with encounters that are easy to fake, with encounters that you can pretend like there's a risk of failure. This version of Dungeons & Dragons is not concerned with fairness. It is concerned with presenting a living, breathing world and presenting the players with information that they can use to make meaningful choices. Presenting them with a host of challenges and then letting them decide which is the challenge they want to face. Now, what that does is it challenges the players to get good. It challenges the players to think harder about what they're doing, and it challenges the players to prioritize what they want to do. When you approach the game as a living world situation, as a world in which not even the dungeon master has full, complete knowledge, then you open up the door for all kinds of randomness, for all kinds of surprises and all kinds of excitement and drama that you don't get when you try to plan everything out. One of the things to be aware of is that we humans are created by our creator with this ability to find patterns where no patterns exist. Look up at the stars sometime and look at the Big Dipper. It's just, 8, 9 stars? Everybody goes, oh, that's a drinking gourd. It's a dipper. It's a ladle. Right? They find a pattern. Constellations look like Leo the Lion. There's Orion the Hunter. We are really good at finding patterns, even if there isn't necessarily a pattern there. And that will happen if you embrace the randomness of wandering monsters, of random monster encounters. And it's very exciting when you start to draw those connections and you start to make those connections, because you find that you are uncovering connections that were not designed. They just came out of nowhere. And suddenly you've got things that no one sitting at the table expected. And I think this is a good point. I'm gonna close this for a minute. Let me just move this out of the way, because there's one thing I think that gets short shrift in our hobby, and that is the fact that when you sit down at a table, we tend to think of there's a screen, right? Here's the book set up like this, and here you go. The DM is over here, and the players are over here. But I think that's a false dichotomy because the dungeon master is also playing the game. Now, I guess you could argue, well, hey, the word level has 3 different meanings. So does the word player. Don't think about the game as the DM and the players. The DM is a player. And ultimately, everyone has the same amount of power at the table. Ultimately, everyone has the same ability to stand up and say, I'm not enjoying this, I'm leaving. The power to say no is ultimately the only power any of us has at the table. And if you take back some of that power as somebody running a player character, if you step back and approach the campaign itself as a joint cooperative effort by all of the players, then you will have a much more equitable, exciting, surprising. I can't tell you the benefits that accrue when you do that. And I think this is a great way. This is an overlooked way to allowing for multiple DMs to run in the same campaign. Now, in the crews that I run with, we've essentially carved up the campaign world into different regions. So Joe is running this region over here, and Jeff is running that region over here. And it's only in the kind of margins where they start to blur together that the 2 DMs have to really communicate and make sure that everybody's on the same page. But in those areas, the beauty is because you've got multiple players who are playing in both regions at the same time, those players can help the DMs understand things, make connections that the 2 DMs alone would never be able to make, let alone one of them who doesn't know what's going on in the other portion of the map. So that's something else to consider when it comes to randomizing your campaign generation, is that it opens the door for an end to this destructive thought process of the DM's world, and we all just, he deigns to allow us to sit at the table and perhaps try to jump through the hoops and not upset the balance of his camp. No. It's not his campaign. It's our campaign, brother. And we're all discovering it together, and we're all making connections together. Circling back to Appendix C. Use the advice that Gary gives you for generating your own tables. But what follows equally applies to your tables as it does if you are just using by the book. One table that I think gets overlooked fairly regularly is this one. If you are on the equivalent of the first level of the dungeon, well, what do you mean? Okay, well, I mean, just as in Great Britain, the first floor is the floor above ground floor. They have ground first, second, third. And in the United States, the ground floor is the first floor. So you get in the elevator and you push 1, and that's the lobby. And then 2 is what the British call the first floor. So you have that same situation with dungeons where, well, what do you mean? Is if you go up, if you've got a tower that's 3 floors high and it's got 7 basements, which one of those is level 1? Well, don't worry about it. We're talking about the equivalent level of the dungeon, the one the guys are going to encounter first. There's a chance that they may encounter level 3 monsters on that first level. Well, that's kind of interesting because that informs the actual process. For those of you that are driving, don't look at your screen. The actual process is you roll a d20. And if you're on the first level of the dungeon, then on a 1 through 16, use the first level monsters. On a 17, 18, 19, there you go. You got a 15% chance that you're going to encounter monster level 2. And there is a 5% chance that you're going to encounter monster level 3. So let's take a look at that monster level 3 chart, shall we? I am, once again, speaking extemporaneously, and I may discover some things on my own. So level 3, we're looking at things like ghouls. Wait a minute, ghouls on the first level of the dungeon? How is that fair? I hope you got elves with you. Oh, they're going to paralyze and eat us all. Giant lizards, ogres. What else are we looking at here? Giant woozles. And then, is there even a chance for dragons on this level? You have a dragon sub-table. Yeah, there she is. Characters, dragons. Wait a minute, a very young black dragon on the first level of the dungeon, even though it's monster level 3? Yeah, that could be. And now you hit that mark, and now you got something interesting. Now you got something very surprising. Black dragon, dungeon level 1. What does that mean? How is he there? Why is he there? How do we make those connections? One of the other things, this is an interesting thing to happen. You are fortunate if that happens, because now you've got, maybe you have a faction, right? Maybe you've got that dragon and he's commanding, well, we We roll again for other encounters, and we have some encounter level 2s. And look at that, we've got some Lemur devils. Oh, wait a minute. And maybe a character. Oh, wait a minute. What does that mean? Maybe that character summoned or maybe the dragon has summoned these devils, and the devils and the dragon are in cahoots. Most of these things aren't very intelligent, though, at least on level 2. Are there any intelligent ones? Gnolls, right? Maybe Gnolls working for a dragon. Those things come up, they could be very interesting. Bear in mind the odds of encountering a dragon, and this is one of the things you should key in on. The odds of encountering a dragon on that level 1, first you've got a 5% chance of even hitting the level 3 monster encounter. Then when you roll your D percentile, you've only got a 2% chance. So now what is that? 0.05 times 0.02? You've only got a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting that dragon. How exciting is it when you do? And of course, there's 3 dragons, black, brass, and white. So the black dragon is basically a 30% chance. But you get the idea. Is it's going to be vanishingly rare. But how cool when it actually hits. The other issue is that some of these things are more common than others. So, for example, our gnolls, you've got a 32 to 30, you got like a 6% chance of hitting gnolls. I think you'd be amazed when you embrace this concept of random encounters, how often you double hit things. And be aware of the fact that if you have a first encounter here, you've already made your checks, and oh, hey, we found somebody. Okay, that means that you have to roll. Okay, so now we have something in hand. And let's say we roll the gnolls. What are the odds that the next encounter is also gnolls? Well, 32 to 38, that's a 7% chance. So it's not actually a 7 out of 100 times 7 out of 100. It's not as rare as you might think. You have that first encounter guaranteed. But I think you'd be surprised even how often you will encounter gnolls 3 times. Or let's go back and take a look at the first level chart here, where we have a lot more of those. Isn't it interesting? Let's look at all of the sentient creatures, or demi-humans, if you will, that you can encounter on the first level. Dwarves, elves, gnomes, goblins, halflings, hobgoblins, humans, kobolds, orcs. And I think that's it. But compared to the second level, where it's just gnolls, there's an awful lot of sentient creatures kind of hanging around the lobby of these dungeons, coming and going. These are also... Now, let's take a look at the wilderness table. To make it easy, we're just going to look at the plains. We'll do temperate, subtropical conditions, uninhabited wilderness areas. Let's take a look at how many sentient creatures we have. And the plains is right next to the identification. So it's not really random. It's just for the sake of convenience. We can go down the list and go, look, okay, we have a chance at bugbears. We have a chance at demi-humans as an individual. I think there's a subtable for that. We have a chance for giants. Actually, a 2% chance of giants. That's pretty good. Humanoids, and humanoids is going to be your goblins. There's another table for that. We're scrolling down. Men, 20% chance that you're going to encounter men. You are far more likely to encounter men on these tables of various types than you are humanoids. That's an interesting thing that I don't think gets covered enough. Remember that in this version of D&D, it is very humanocentric. As it should be. Humans are pretty awesome. Ogres. What else we got? Rolling down the plains, and then I think that's really about it. No, we got a little bit of a chance of trolls, and that's really it. But I think the point that I'm getting at here is that when you're on the first level of a dungeon, you're kind of on that border between the wilderness and this, like we're out on the borderlands, right? So we've left civilization behind, and we're getting closer and closer to chaos. And so things are getting a little more weird, but the creatures that you are likely to encounter are still somewhat, they're human-ish, they're devolved humans, and yeah, they may be evil incarnate, but they're still at least familiar enough for you to understand what you're dealing with. When we get down to monster level 5, look at these bonkers creatures. This is where you start to see a lot more things like cockatrices, displacer beasts, minotaurs, right? Beastmen, slithering trackers, shriekers, giant snakes and spiders, imps, leucrata, right? So things are getting weirder and weirder the deeper you go. We're getting, as we've talked about in How to Design Dungeons, once you get down to monster level 7, now we're talking about demons and ifrits and golems and groaning spirits and mimics, mind flayers, all that good stuff. Hey, you're not necessarily on monster level 7. Flipping back to here, monster level 7, you can start to encounter that when you're down 5 levels deep. Monster level 7, of course, is going to be most popular when you get down to levels, right? Down to level 79. I think you get my point. You get my point that you're easing into the weirdness of the situation. And there's a lot of fun things that happen when these dungeon tables start to intersect and interact with these wilderness tables. You wind up with situations where you may have dungeons that are designed specifically to protect their inhabitants from the creatures that you encounter out here. If you want a cheap and easy way to reskin these tables to fit your campaign world, it's all right here in the design notes that Gary provided. But to just outline it for you, take this exact same table. We're looking at the plains in the uninhabited wilderness, and as I said, you've got a 20% chance of encountering humans and only like a 5% chance of encountering humanoids. And then you have to roll on the humanoid table, and man, there's only you roll 16 to 0. Are you rolling a d20 on this one? No. You are far more likely to encounter orcs than any other kind of humanoid when you are in the plains. Now, I will pause and I will say that the way these tables intersect does help reveal the campaign world that is baked into the DNA of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This is what we call the inherent campaign. Oh man, I'm drawing a blank now. There's another term for that. It's not explicitly outlined that orcs live in the plains, but if you analyze these tables, you'll find, you're a lot more likely to find orcs. If you encounter humanoids, they're going to be in the plains. And orcs are also, look at that. If you go across to each of these, they are generally speaking the more common creatures that humanoids that you're likely to find. With the exception of, see, your kobolds here. If you're in the forest, you're probably going to encounter kobolds. Let's take a look. Let's see if we can figure out where goblins are supposed to live. 40% chance of goblins living in the desert. Goblins, and then also in the mountains. So goblins are largely a desert and mountainous creature, at least relative to orcs. That's interesting, man. That's kind of interesting. But in your world, hey, maybe we have a region of the world, right? Remember, we did our orc lords. We had plains that were littered with orcish settlements. All right, very easy. All you have to do is take this exact same table where humans are likely to come up like 20 to 30% of the time, and just make a photocopy and just cross out human and write orc. Oh, but you also have orc over here, so cross out orc and write in human. You've changed the odds, and now what's happened is you have your own inherent campaign world that's predicated upon the wandering monsters, or the random monsters, I should say, but you've turned the actual reins of creation over to the fates, over to chance. You are now the god playing dice with your own mini-universe, unlike our universe, where, that doesn't happen. Point being, well, there's a lot of points in this. This is just kind of a general discussion of things that we all kind of know and we all kind of intuit, but we don't get reminded of often enough. There is a good chance, whatever dungeon level you're on, there may be monsters walking up from below or down from above. Maybe they're carrying messages. Maybe they're carrying treasure. Maybe they're returning from a raid. Remember, we've got factions within any decent-sized dungeon. There's all kinds of reasons for creatures to be wandering around, and coming up with those reasons is a big part of the fun. One of the cheats that's very popular in advice circles is, as the DM, you don't decide anything. You just present a situation, let your players spitball solutions, and then you pick the one that you like best. That's a perfectly valid way to run a game. That is a way for the DM to allow some surprises for himself in the evening. That's a way to turn the reins loose and ensure that you aren't falling victim to that devilish temptation to try to steer the campaign in the direction that you believe it should go and to take power from the players. You gotta empower those players. They're great people. You wouldn't be playing with them if they were idiots. You wouldn't be playing with them if you didn't like them anyway. Trust your players. Trust the dice, trust the game, and trust your own ability to judge and to create the connections that make even all of this weird random math just come to life and just suddenly when you embrace this style of play, this world just leaps into existence and you are engaged in a voyage of discovery, just like your players are, just like you're reading a novel. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the plot twists. You don't know what the surprises are. This is the way to go, man. Use these tables, build some of your own, and put a few things in that seem really weird. Hang on, I'm going to do an awkward edit there because I'm going to stop trying to come up with stuff off the cuff. As you sit down and generate your own tables, put some surprises in. Put in some things that are really oddball situations. Make it a low chance. Hey, maybe there's only a 2% chance that you encounter that weird thing that's wildly out of place. But if you do, that's a surprise. Treasure those moments. The same way you treasure like that critical hit at a very important junction that takes out the big bad evil guy. Love this game. Play the game. Gary gave us a masterpiece here. Trust it, trust your players, trust yourself. Till next time, I'm Mr. Wargaming. I'm praying for you.